The silence was the first thing anyone noticed. Jiongzheng was a quiet colony by nature, a small agricultural outpost on the very edge of what the United Human Confederacy called its tended garden. But its silence was a living one, filled with the low hum of hydroponic bays, the chatter of workers over the combs, and the soft chime of data packets arriving daily from the system's relay buoy. When that chatter stopped for a full 26-hour cycle, it wasn't immediately a cause for alarm at the neighboring observatory on HAO station. Technical glitches happen, especially out on the fringe, but after a second cycle of perfect, dead air silence, protocol kicked in. A small, fast courier ship, the Swift, was dispatched from HAO. Its pilot, a man named Jay, who had run mail to Jiongzheng a dozen times, tried to raise them the whole way. Jiongzheng Control, this is UHC courier on approach. Anyone copy? Static was his only reply. A faint, cold knot began to tighten in his stomach. It wasn't fear of the unknown, not yet. It was the fear of finding a simple, stupid accident. A main reactor flare, maybe, that had fried their comms array. He hoped it was just that dot. He saw it long before his sensors did. The human eye, trained on the curve of a green and blue world against the black, notices when that curve is wrong. As the Swift broke from its jump and Jiongzheng filled his viewport, Jay saw the scars. Thin, hazy tendrils of gray and brown smeared across the atmosphere where there should have been clear sky. He boosted magnification, his hands feeling clumsy on the controls. The colony's main settlement, Hewan, was gone. Not damaged, gone, where the neat, circular layout of composite buildings and green domes should have been. There was a jagged, glassy crater, still glowing a faint, sickly orange in the twilight zone. The surrounding fields, usually a patchwork of vibrant green and gold, were blackened wastelands. He could see the outlines of smaller craters, precise and terrible, dotting the landscape. No, he whispered, the word loud in the silent cockpit. No, no, no. He routed whole power to sensors and scanners, his training overriding his shock. He swept the area. No energy signatures. No life signs. No distress beacons. The system's relay buoy, a sturdy station 1,000,000 kilometers out, was a twisted shell of melted metal. That explained the total blackout. Someone had killed the comms first.J, guided the Swift into a low, slow orbit over the ruin of Hawan. His ship's cameras captured everything, feeding the data back to EJO in a grim, real-time stream. The crater was kilometers wide. On the periphery, he could make out debris, the shattered spine of a transport crawler, the shredded tarp of a greenhouse, a single boot. He saw no bodies. The heat had been too intense. His console chimed. A weak, intermittent signal, not on any standard channel. A backup databank, perhaps buried or shielded by a collapse. It was auto-broadcasting a data packet on a loop. Jay locked onto it and downloaded the fragment. It was a personal log, video and audio. The timestamp was from the beginning of the attack. The face that filled his screen was young, smudged with dirt but calm. A woman named Lee. He knew her. He'd delivered seed catalogs and engineering parts to her at the hydroponics bay. She had always given him a small box of fresh starberries, the colony's pride. The video was shaky. Lee was in some kind of utility trench, metal walls rising around her. The light was bad, but her face was clear. Behind her, the deep, threatening booms of impacts could be heard. ... Primary power is down. They hit the reactor first, I think. The comms array is gone. I saw it fall. Her voice was steady, a focused monotone. She was reporting, not panicking. Sensors showed multiple vessel signatures in high orbit before we lost the network. Profiles don't match any Confederacy design. Not pirates. Too big, too organized. A tremendous explosion sounded closer. The camera jerked. Dust sifted down from above. Lee looked up, then back at the recorder. We got as many people as we could into the deep shelters, but the main access was cut off by the first strike. I'm in maintenance trench 7. I don't think they're landing. They're just burning us from the sky. She paused, listening. The sound was different now. Not the deep crump of kinetic rods hitting dirt, but a rising, shrieking whistle, growing louder, closer. A sound of atmosphere being torn apart. She looked up again, and for the first time, her calm cracked. Her eyes widened, reflecting a light that was not the dim glow of her wrist light. A light that was descending, violet and terrible. The sky, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, almost lost in the rising scream. The sky is filled with violet fire. The transmission ended in a burst of static. Che sat frozen, the echo of her final words hanging in the air of his cockpit. The cold knot in his stomach had become a block of ice. He finished his orbit in silence, gathering the terrible proof, and then he punched the jump drive. EJO station needed to see this. Now, the news did not travel slowly. The data from the Swift, the images of the crater, the sensor logs showing unknown, powerful energy signatures, and Lee's log rippled through the Confederacy network like a shockwave. Gyeongzang was not a major colony, but it was a peaceful one. It was a symbol of quiet perseverance. Its annihilation was an act of pure, unprovoked extermination. On the capital world of Terra Nova, in the main parliamentary hall, the footage was played on the main display. The representatives, usually a cacophony of different factions and interests, fell into a silence so deep it was suffocating. They watched the glassy crater. They heard the whistling scream in Lee's log. They saw her face in the last moment. Admiral Min was in his office at Fleet Command when the alert came through. He was a tall man with a permanent tiredness around his eyes, a man who had spent his life preventing wars. The casualty list from Gyeongsang was flagged for his review, a standard procedure for high-ranking officers with potential family in affected zones. He opened the file without particular dread, thinking of his younger sister. She was an engineer. She was sensible. She was on a core world, safe. He scrolled. His breath caught. Asterisk Lee Minji, hydroponics engineer, grade 3. Assigned Gyeongsang Colony, Hawan Settlement. Status, confirmed deceased. Identification, DNA match from site sample GH7. Asterisk. The words on the screen blurred. Minji, Lee. She had always used their mother's surname, said it felt more like her own. The woman in the log. The calm voice describing the end. His little sister. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling, peaceful city below. The political debates were already starting on the news feeds behind him. Words like measured response, diplomatic channels, and investigation floated in the air. Admiral Min heard none of it. All he could hear was the silence from Gyeongsang, a silence that had once been his sister's voice. All he could see, against the glittering city lights, was the phantom image of violet fire filling the sky. The block of ice that had formed in Jay's gut now settled in Min's heart. It was cold, hard, and absolute. This was not an incident. This was a message. And as he turned from the window, his face a mask of grim stone, he knew humanity would have to send a reply. The silence in the United Human Confederacy's Parliament chamber was not peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a storm, charged with a terrible energy. The giant screen had gone dark after playing the final, haunting seconds of Lee's log. The image of the glassy crater on Gyeongsang was burned into every mind. Then, the storm broke. The first speaker for the isolationist bloc, a man from a wealthy core world, stood. His voice was careful. "We have seen a tragedy. an unspeakable crime. But we must ask, who are the Korvathi? Our intelligence suggests a vast empire. To rush into a full war for one colony, it is an emotional response. We must seek dialogue. There must be a reason. A low, angry murmur rippled through the chamber. From the opposite side, a representative from the Martian industrial sector stood. Her face was pale with fury. A reason? We saw the reason. They burned a peaceful colony from orbit. They did not land to conquer. They did not send demands. They erased it. What dialogue do you have with a fire? The debate raged for days. It was broadcast everywhere. In cramped apartments on Luna, in the mess halls of freighters, in the schoolyards of Terra Nova, people watched. They saw politicians arguing about resource allocation, about risk assessment, about the stability of the galactic frontier. But the people were not debating. They were mourning, and their mourning was hardening into something else. On the news feeds, alongside the political talk, they played the footage from Gyeongsang on a loop. Not just the strategic views of the crater, but the small things Jay's sensors had captured. A child's toy, a little model of a starship, half melted in the dirt. A family photo, miraculously unburned under a piece of plasteel, showing a smiling couple and their baby. And they played Lee's log. Her calm, reporting voice. Her final whispered words. The sky is filled with violet fire. A shift happened. It was not loud. It was quiet and deep. The grief did not fade. It crystallized. The question in the streets and the homes changed from, how could this happen? To, what will we do about it? A silent, collective decision settled over humanity. Never again. Not to anyone. Not anywhere. Petitions with billions of digital signatures flooded the parliamentary network. Dock workers on Jupiter's orbitals threatened to stop all non-military shipping. Veterans from old small conflicts began organizing, not for protest, but for preparation. The public sentiment became a cold, solid wall, and it was pressing against the politicians in their chamber. Admiral Min watched this from his office. He had not spoken publicly. He had submitted his formal report, a dry, tactical analysis that concluded with one line. The Korvathi Empire represents an existential threat. A decisive military response is the only strategic deterrent. In private, he spent his nights reviewing the full, unedited sensor logs from the Swift. He watched the attack pattern. It was methodical, clinical, and total. Comes first, then power, then population centers. It was a lesson in terror. He knew the isolationists in Parliament were wrong. The Korvathi had not attacked for resources or territory. They had attacked to show they could. To prove human life was insignificant. To make the Confederacy bow, Min would not bow. His sister's face, from an old holiday photo he kept on a private datapad, was his focus. Her voice on the log was his guide. He began to work, not as a grieving brother, but as the commander he was. He drafted plans, not for a border skirmish, not for a punitive raid. He drafted the skeleton of an idea so vast it seemed insane. He called in his most trusted officer, Commander Yuna. She was a logistics genius, known for making impossible supply chains work during the Cygnus famine. She was small, sharp-eyed, and never spoke a word without thinking. Yuna, he said, turning the screen to her. It showed a single staggering number, 700,000. I need to know if we can build this. Not just the ships, the crews, the weapons, the fuel, the food, the spare parts, everything. For a campaign not of defense, but of total military annihilation. Yuna did not blink. She did not ask if it was right. She looked at the number, then at the frozen image of Gyeongsang on Min's wall. She simply asked, time frame? 5 years, Min said. She was silent for a full minute, her mind racing through networks of resources, shipyards, training facilities. It will break our economy. It will consume everything. Can it be done? Min pressed. Yuna met his eyes. Yes, Admiral. It can be done. We will have to change everything. But it can be done. The final parliamentary vote came 2 days later. The isolationists made their last, pleading arguments for caution. The Speaker of Parliament, an old woman from Earth, finally stood. She had lost a grandson in a mining accident years ago. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the silent chamber. We have heard arguments of resources, of risk, of political cost. She paused, looking at the faces before her. But we are missing the only argument that matters. We are human. When a child is struck down for no reason, you do not ask the attacker for a dialogue. You stop them, so they can never do it again. To anyone. She took a deep breath. Today, we are not voting on a declaration of war. We are voting on a promise. A promise to every citizen that their life, and the life of their children, is not small. That it is worth more than all the stars in the sky to us. We vote to keep that promise. The vote was called. One by one, the representatives voted. The tally lit up the board. It was near unanimous. The measure passed. Operation Han River was born. It was not a secret. Let the Korvathi hear its name. Let them wonder what it meant. Humanity's message was simple. You burned one of our gardens. Now we will bring a flood. That night, Min stood on his balcony. Across the city, he could see the lights of the orbital elevators, already humming with increased traffic. Shipyards that had built freighters were now retooling. Academies that trained pilots were expanding. The entire civilization was turning, like a great machine, toward a single purpose. He looked up at the stars, not with wonder, but with a cold calculation. Somewhere out there, the beings who had lit the violet fire were waiting, confident in their power. They expected fear. They expected submission. They would get vengeance instead. Quiet, organized, and absolute. The work had begun. The silence that followed the vote was not the silence of waiting. It was the silence of a breath being drawn before a scream. Across the hundreds of worlds and orbitals of the United Human Confederacy, the great machine of peace began to break itself apart. In its place, something new began to grow. Sharp-edged and cold-dot the Korvathi Empire, according to the sparse intelligence gathered, did nothing. They watched. Their analysts likely saw the flurry of activity and dismissed it. A minor species, wounded and angry, throwing a tantrum. They would build a few more patrol ships, perhaps launch a symbolic raid on a distant outpost, and then the fear would set in. They would learn their place. The Korvathi had done this before. They did not understand the promise. They did not understand Operation Han River. Admiral Nin's strategy was simple on the screen, impossible in reality. Commander Yuna's domain was the impossible. Her office became a nexus of data, a storm of numbers and schematics. She did not sleep for the first 3 months. She coordinated with guild masters of the asteroid miners, with the directors of fuel refining orbitals over gas giants, with the factory foremen on industrial hellscapes like Vulcan's Forge. Every cargo hauler, every bulk freighter, every private yacht was registered, assessed, and if capable, drafted. The economy did not just shift to war. It was consumed by it. The building of the Armada was a black hole, sucking in every resource, every talent, every ounce of will. Shipyards that had constructed graceful passenger liners now forged the angular. Armored hulls of Vengeance-class battle carriers. Factories that made agricultural drones now assembled swarms of autonomous attack drones, each no bigger than a man's hand, capable of stripping a ship to its bones. On barren moons, massive railguns were built, their barrels so long they cast shadows across the craters. And the people came. They did not come with cheering flags or loud patriotic songs. They came with a quiet, grim determination. Young men and women from quiet farming planets, their hands still smelling of earth, learned to load plasma batteries. Engineers who had designed water reclamation systems now tuned matter-antimatter annihilation cores. Pilots who had navigated comet tails learned assault formation tactics. There were no protests. There was only a line stretching around blocks on 1,000 worlds, of people waiting to add their name to the list. One of those in line was a young man named Juan. He had been a traffic controller on a busy orbital around Sirius. He had watched the Jeongseong footage on his break. He saw the toy in the dirt. He went home, kissed his sleeping daughter, and joined up the next day. He was assigned to navigation on a heavy cruiser, the UHC Righteous Fury. He didn't do it for glory. He did it so his daughter would never have to see a sky filled with violet fire dot in the digital realms. Another kind of construction was happening. A young, brilliant, and intensely focused tech officer named Jay was given a task by Admiral Min. The Korvathi are older, more experienced. Their fleet commanders will think faster, act as one. We cannot match them mind for mind. So we will give our fleet one mind. A new one? Jay's creation was not a simple battle. AI. It was a distributed consciousness woven into the command network of every human ship. He called it the Tacticus. It did not give orders. It processed. It took in sensor data from 700,000 points of view, predicted Korvathi maneuvers 1,000 steps ahead, and offered options to human commanders, options no single human mind could ever see. It was the ultimate tool for vengeance. Cold, logical, and utterly without mercy or fear. Jay tested it in 10,000 simulations. In every one, the simulated Korvathi fleets were torn apart. He showed the results to Min. Will it work in reality? Min asked, his voice quiet. The math is perfect, Jay said, his eyes ringed with fatigue from endless coding. Reality is just another variable. The Tacticus will adapt. For 5 years, humanity built in the silent, focused dark. The Korvathi probes came occasionally, curious sensors poking at the edges of human space. They saw the activity, the incredible industrial output. Their reports likely spoke of a surprising but frantic defense buildup. They saw the number of holes and dismissed them. Quantity to the Korvathi was not quality. They believed their individual warships, their veteran crews, their imperial battle doctrine were superior. They were confident. They were blind. The final piece came together in the Oort cloud of a nameless star, a mustering point far from prying eyes. One by one, in groups of tens, then hundreds, then thousands, the ships arrived. They were not parade perfect. They were scarred from haste, patched in places, their crews green, but sharpened by 5 years of relentless training. They were carriers like floating cities, destroyers sleek as knives, bulky troop transports, fast scout vessels, and titanic planet breakers whose main guns could crack a continent. 700,000 warships. A number that had been a madness on a screen 5 years ago. Now it was a reality, hanging in the void, a constellation of vengeful steel. On the bridge of the flagship, the UHC Vengeance, Admiral Min stood at the main viewport. He looked out not at his fleet, but at the dark. Somewhere in that dark was the Korvathi throne world. Somewhere in that dark, the beings who had given the order for Jeongseong lived, unaware. Yuna came to stand beside him. Her work was done. The greatest logistical feat in history was ready to move. All task forces report ready, Admiral. Supply lines are established. The Tacticus network is live and stable. Min nodded. He thought of his sister's final, calm report. He thought of the child's toy in the dust. He turned and walked to the com station. A channel was open to every ship, to every crew member in a cockpit, an engine room, a gun turret. 700,000 ships fell silent, waiting. Min's face appeared on 1,000,000 screens. He did not look angry. He looked tired and utterly resolved. They thought we would mourn and retreat, he said, his voice calm and clear, filling the silent cabins and halls. They thought one colony, 1,000,000 lives, was an acceptable loss in their calculation of power. They believed their violet fire would teach us fear. He paused, his eyes seeming to look at each and every one of them. Today, we begin their lesson. We are not bringing them fire. We are bringing them consequence. We are bringing them the focused, collective will of a species that has chosen to remember. For Jiong Seng, for Li, for every life they thought was small. He turned and nodded to the helmsman on the Vengeance. All vessels, Min said, his final order for the long journey. Jump. And across the fleet, navigation officers like Juan fed the coordinates into their systems. Engines powered by cores, tuned by former water engineers, flared with impossible light. Space itself twisted and tore dot in a silent, synchronized flash that would have blinded any watching star. The constellation of 700,000 points of light vanished. They were coming. They called it the Kalidar Anvil. It was the heart of Korvathi military industry, a sprawling, fortified nest of shipyards and weapon forges orbiting a dying red star. For centuries, the ships that had pacified a dozen species had slid from its construction docks. It was protected by a fleet of 200 of the Empire's finest warships, their hulls sleek and ominous, their commanders born into warrior castes. They were the pride of the Korvathi, and they were bored. Patrol duty here, so deep in safe territory, was an honor, but a dull one. The first warning was a shiver in the local gravity field, a tidal pull from something immense displacing space. The Korvathi sensor officers dismissed it as a micro-singularity, a natural phenomenon. The second warning was the light. The space around the Kalidar Anvil began to shimmer, then tear, as if the fabric of reality was being pricked by 1,000,000 needles. Then the needles became spears. Human ships did not emerge from jump in a neat formation. They erupted. One moment, empty space. The next, a wall of armored hulls, angular and brutal, filled the viewports of the Korvathi command ship. The scale was incomprehensible. It was not a fleet. It was a geological event, a sudden mountain range of warships where there had been void. On the bridge of the UHC Righteous Fury, Juan's hands flew over his nav console. The data stream from the Tacticus flowed into his mind. It did not give him orders. It gave him a perfect flowing path, a lane in a chaotic sky. All ahead, flank speed, his captain said, her voice tight. Target the lead destroyer's engine cluster. J System says it will break their flank. The Korvathi fleet reacted with disciplined shock. They moved to engage, their formations elegant and practiced. They opened fire with lances of plasma that could melt a moon's crust. They were precise. They were powerful. They were too slow that the human armada did not fight like a fleet. It fought like a single organism. When the Korvathi moved to encircle a group of human cruisers, those cruisers would pivot and burn away, not in retreat, but to lure the attackers into the kill zone of 10 waiting carriers. Swarms of attack drones, each piloted by a fragment of J's Tacticus, flowed like metallic insects into Korvathi engine vents, chewing through power lines. Korvathi ships that lost shields for a single second found a dozen railgun slugs hammering the exact same weak point. Coordinated across 100,000 kilometers, the Korvathi commander broadcast a demand on all frequencies. Unknown aggressors. You violate Imperial space. Withdraw or be annihilated. The signal was proud, angry. The human reply was not a voice. It was a data packet, broadcast from the Vengeance. It was Lee's log. The calm voice, the whistling scream, the final words. The sky is filled with violet fire. It played once. Then the channel went dead. Then the real attack began, the human planet breakers. Hanging back like distant giants, powered their primary weapons. Beams of focused gravity, capable of shearing continents, lanced out. They did not strike the Korvathi ships. They struck the Kalidar shipyards. The immense orbital structures, symbols of imperial power for generations, twisted like foil in a fire. They crumpled, then shattered in silence. Spectacular detonations that lit up the Red Star with a false, white dawn. The pride of the Korvathi fleet died trying to protect a place that was already gone. Their elegant formations collapsed into chaos. Their superior firepower was useless against an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere, that predicted their every move, and had already planned 10 counters. A Korvathi dreadnought, trying to rally a squadron, was targeted by 47 human ships at once. Its shields flared and died. Its hull was punctured in 100 places until it cracked open, spilling fire and air and lives into the vacuum. It was not a battle. It was a dismantling. The news spread through the Korvathi Empire, not as a report, but as a tremor of disbelief. Kalidar was gone. The fleet guarding it was gone. The humans were not raiding border worlds. They were cutting deep into the Empire's muscle, and they were doing it with a ferocity and coordination that shattered all doctrine. The human armada did not stop. It did not occupy. It moved like a scythe. Next was the Bartek Fuel Refinery Complex, a series of orbitals that processed the antimatter for the Korvathi Navy. The local defense force, having heard of Kalidar, tried to negotiate. They offered surrender, offered resources. From the Vengeance, Admiral Min watched the offer. His face showed nothing. He nodded to Yuna, who was coordinating the fleet's movements with cool efficiency. They supplied the fleet that burned Gyeongzing, Yuna said, her voice flat. The Tacticus confirms their fuel signatures match residue from the attack. Min's order was a single word. Proceed. The human fleet did not accept the surrender of the military platforms. They destroyed them. Then they systematically blasted the refinery orbitals into scattered debris. They took no prisoners from the military crews. The message was chillingly clear. This was not a war for conquest. This was a war of judgment. On the bridge of the righteous fury, Juan watched as a Korvathi light frigate, engines dead, tumbled past his viewport. He saw a figure in a Korvathi pressure suit clinging to a piece of wreckage. For a second, he was not a navigator. He was a father, looking at another living thing facing the end. Then he remembered the toy in the Gyeongzang dirt. The cold focus returned. He looked back at his console, at the path the Tacticus was plotting toward the next target. His job was to follow the path, to make sure the righteous fury was in the right place to deliver the next blow. The Korvathi High Command was in panic. They scrambled fleets from their core worlds, trying to intercept the human wave. But the humans were not predictable. They used jump points the Korvathi thought were unstable. They struck targets deemed impossible to reach. And always, they fought with that terrifying unity, their ships moving as one, their strategies adapting instantly. The galaxy watched, stunned. The minor species, the ones the Korvathi had bullied or ignored, saw the violet fire of the Empire being met with a cold blue-white fire of human vengeance. They saw the invincible become fragile. They saw the arrogant become afraid. The human armada, 700,000 warships strong, was a storm burning its way toward the heart of the Empire. And with every system they left in ruins behind them, they broadcast the same 2 words on all Korvathi channels, a grim echo that followed their wake. Remember Gyeongzing. The throne world of the Korvathi Empire was called Corval Prime. It was not a planet of great beauty, but of immense ancient power. Its continents were carved with geometric patterns that were city sprawls, and its skies were always busy with the traffic of an empire that ruled 1,000 stars. Its orbital defenses were legendary, a layered shell of plasma platforms, gravity mines, and battle stations. The Imperial fleet that remained, the last and greatest, formed a glittering, formidable ring around their home. They were waiting. The reports from Calidar, from Bortak, from a dozen other shattered systems, had stripped them of arrogance, but not of duty. They would defend their world to the last dot when space began to bleed light at the edge of the system. They knew the humans had come. The distortion was massive, a wound in reality that trembled the sensors of every ship. And then the human armada arrived. It did not appear all at once. It unfolded. Ship after ship after ship, pouring into the system in a relentless, silent tide until they formed a vast, dark crescent facing the Corvathi ring. 700,000 warships. The number had been an abstract terror in reports. Seeing it was a physical blow. It blotted out the stars. On the bridge of the Vengeance, the mood was not of excitement, but of grim finality. Admiral Min stood perfectly still. The final step of the path was here. Yuna monitored the fleet status, her voice a low, steady stream of confirmations. Jay watched his Tacticus network, a web of light on his console, humming with perfect readiness. It showed the Corvathi formations, their strengths, their weaknesses, their predictable, proud defensive stances. A priority channel hissed to life on the main console. The face that appeared was ancient, its gray skin etched with deep lines, its eyes black and burning with a pride that had not yet broken. The Corvathi Emperor. His voice was a dry rustle, translated by the computer. Admiral of the human fleet. You have done significant damage. You have proven your strength. The attack on your colony was an error, a decision by a regional commander who has been disciplined. We now recognize your sovereignty. Withdraw, and we will open negotiations for reparations. There is no need for further waste of life. Min looked at the Emperor's face. He saw no remorse. He saw only calculation, an attempt to salvage power from disaster. He thought of the final data packet from Jeongzin, of his sister's voice. Play it, he said quietly. Not to the Emperor, but to Jay. On all frequencies. Human and Corvathi, Lee's log began to transmit. The calm, reporting voice filled the silent vacuum between the fleets. The sound of the impacts, the whistling scream growing louder. Her final whispered observation. The sky is filled with violet fire. The log ended. The silent void returned. The Corvathi Emperor's face tightened. He did not understand the context. Only the provocation. Min leaned slightly toward the cum. His voice was flat, clear, and carried the weight of 5 years of silent building. That was not a regional commander. That was a farmer, an engineer. Her name was Lee. This was for her. This was for one colony. He made a slight cutting motion with his hand. All vessels, he said. Execute final sanction. The Battle of Corval Prime did not follow the rules of war. The human armada did not try to break the defensive ring ship by ship. It acted as one vast, coordinated weapon. The Tacticus network flared. 10,000 Corvathi plasma platforms all fired at once, aiming for the largest human carriers. But at the exact moment they fired, those human carriers were not there. They had shifted just enough, guided by Jay's system in the hands of navigators like Juan. The Corvathi shots tore through empty space. Meanwhile, swarms of human drones, so dense they looked like smoke, flowed into the defensive ring, targeting weapon ports and sensor arrays. The human planet breakers, guarded by walls of frigates and cruisers, powered their primary weapons. But they did not aim at the fleet. They aimed at Corval Prime itself. Beams of incredible energy lanced down, not at the cities, but at the barren northern polar continent. They carved. They scoured. They etched into the planet's crust itself, in letters 1,000 kilometers long that would be visible from orbit for 1,000,000 years. A single word in the human language. Jiongzheng. It was not an attack to conquer. It was an attack to inscribe, to make the Korvathi homeworld itself a tombstone. The Imperial fleet, seeing this desecration, charged in a final desperate fury. It was what the Tacticus had predicted. Human battle groups shifted, enveloping them. The fighting was fierce and short. Korvathi ships died bravely, but they died alone, cut off and overwhelmed by an enemy that shared every thought. Huan's ship, the Righteous Fury, shuddered under a direct hit but lunged forward, its railguns hammering a Korvathi command ship until it fell silent. One by one, the lights of the Imperial fleet winked out. The orbital defenses fell to debris. The Emperor's channel was still open, his face now slack with a horror beyond understanding. He saw his fleet die. He saw the word burned into his world. You? You are monsters, the Emperor whispered. Min finally showed a flicker of emotion, a faint, cold sadness in his eyes. No, he said, we are gardeners. You burned one of our gardens. We simply made sure you could never hold a torch again. He nodded to Yuna. Disable all remaining military infrastructure. Leave the civilian orbitals untouched. Then recall all vessels. The order went out. The human armada, its purpose achieved, ceased its offensive. It hung in the sky over Corval Prime, a silent, looming monument. Then, in perfect order, ship by ship, they began to jump away. They did not take spoils. They did not leave occupation forces. They had delivered their message and were going home. On the bridge of the Vengeance, the tension finally broke. Officers slumped in their chairs, the immense weight of the last 5 years lifting, leaving them hollow and tired. Yuna let out a long, slow breath. Jay shut down the main Tacticus interface, the light fading from his eyes. Min turned and walked to his private quarters. The door closed behind him, sealing out the quiet cheers, the murmurs of relief. Inside, the silence was absolute. He walked to a small desk and activated a private viewer. A photo appeared. His sister Lee, smiling, her arms covered in soil from her hydroponic gardens, holding up a perfect red starberry. He had not looked at it since the day she died. He looked at it now. The vengeance was complete. The promise to the Confederacy was kept. The Korvathi Empire was broken, its military might shattered, its pride scarred forever by a name etched into its heart. But the face in the photo did not change. Her smile did not return. The cold, hard thing that had lived in his chest for 5 years did not dissolve. It simply settled, becoming a permanent part of him. The Armada, all 700,000 warships, was moving back into the dark, toward home. They had brought a storm of consequence and had left silence in its wake. Admiral Min sat in the quiet of his room, a victor in an empty hall, and finally allowed himself to mourn the garden and the gardener that were gone.